In China, we're actually seeing a different form of disruption to what we see elsewhere in the world. In China, fintech disruption is dominated by Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Elsewhere in the world, fintech disruption tends to be small startups challenging the incumbent. But when you get in an environment where you've got the three largest internet players, dipping into payments, dipping into financing and loans, and into asset management at quite an aggressive scale, and doing their typical try and fail approach, that becomes a challenge to the incumbents. We've seen things like in the last 12 months or 18 months, the largest asset manager in China grow out of one of the internet providers, 600 billion renminbi under management after just 6 months. These firms are quite aggressive, they're really pushing forward into the internet, and it's a different form of disruption to what we've seen in the US or in the UK, where it is just the startup market. And these are a big threat. The big banks in China are watching them, the big banks here in Hong Kong are watching them, because they have shown they've got the ability to take market share quite quickly and really build quickly off their platforms. Disruption in Hong Kong is more like what we see in the US and the UK. It is a startup market. And the startup market here is still nascent. It's a beautiful startup environment, largely because in true Hong Kong style, it's occurring without interference. It's not being pushed by the government, even though the government has now passed this legislation for innovation and transformation. But what's happened so far has really been entrepreneurial. So it's got a good spirit, a good heart, but most of the fintechs here are still struggling and still new. The ones which I think will see breakthrough in the next 12 months, we have expectations that one of the fintechs here that's operating in the securities industry will make a big mark, possibly not here in Hong Kong, but elsewhere in the world. We have a view that there is a fintech here that's operating in the credit area that is also going to make quite a big impact. And we're also watching very closely one of the robo-advisory firms here in Hong Kong, who we think's got a nice product. Again, we may not see it here, we may see it elsewhere in the world. And I think that says something about the fintech industry in Hong Kong. The fintech industry in Hong Kong is not necessarily focused on Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a small market. It's 7.5 million people. They're here because this is actually a good place to be an entrepreneur. But where their real focus is in China or in the US or one of these bigger markets. So the incumbents are pursuing three different approaches. The first one is what I call the invest and acquire approach, where various incumbents have set up maybe VC type funds and those sorts of things to actually invest in fintech companies that they think have got potential. The second thing we call that we're seeing are the garages and labs, where companies are actually setting up incubator type environments where that are their own, supposedly at an arm's length, but they're to actually see what these labs can create that they will then take into their organisation. Thanks to government support, etc., we're seeing those sorts of labs largely being developed down in Singapore. And finally, the kind of fun ones that we're seeing is a few companies who are doing bake-offs between fintech firms, where they will give them a challenge and spread that around any firms who'd like to actually come in and try and pitch a particular solution for it, and then invest in one or two of those solutions to actually try and solve the problem that they've got. So these different approaches will be interesting. The VC approach is a proven approach. We've seen that occur. I think the bake-off approach is also kind of interesting. The one which I think will be a challenge for the incumbents is the garages and labs, because I'm not sure whether they're going to expect an ROI far too quickly out of these firms, whether they will hold them too close. They set out these firms and say, yes, they're to be experimental and have them fail fast, but it's not in the nature of a large insurance company to operate that way. It's not their DNA. So whether they give them the freedom that they need to actually contribute to the organisation is yet to be seen. The issue for fintechs in financial services is that the breadth of the industries are so broad. So it's not like the taxi industry, which can be disrupted quite easily because it's quite a unique value chain that's easily definable. In payments or in deposits or in insurance. They're broad value chains which can even be decomposed into sub-segments along the way. So disruption is not going to occur, and the fintechs will not occur where they will typically break down an entire value chain of a financial services industry. The ones which are really going to have impact over this next 12 months are the ones which have found a particular part of the value chain of an industry that is open to digital disruption, and that's the point they're going after. That may be the distribution part. It may actually be providing technologies and services to the incumbents themselves. They're the ones that we expect to actually be quite successful. I think fintechs, for a lot of the incumbents, are going to contribute to different parts of their value chain. But also, I think some of the areas where fintechs are trying to go after are very difficult areas to challenge the incumbents on. Hong Kong's a hotbed at the moment for payments, but payments is a big area, and unless you've got a lot of funding behind you, taking on the incumbent players in the payment space is incredibly difficult to do. And the incumbents are sort of sitting back and defending rather nicely against them, largely by ignoring them. And I think we're going to see this continue for some time. I think the payment space is one of the hotbeds that's really difficult at the moment. I think that in asset management, we're going to see a few very interesting challenges, but also complementary stories and distribution stories for the incumbents. And in the payments and loan space, I think we'll see the peer-to-peer models in this part of the world really start to mature. Companies like Lufax in China, which, by the end of this year will have something like 50 billion renminbi in transactions, will really start to set the mark.